Well, hello, Professor Loeb. Welcome to the show. I am so thrilled that you are here.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Absolutely. Now, we're here to talk about your new book. Can you talk about the premise of the book? It's called Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth. Why did you feel like this was the right time for this book, and why now?
Well, the basic message is that we might not be the smartest kid on the block. Uh, I have two daughters, and when they were very young, they thought that they're unique and privileged, and the world centers on them. And that changed when I took them to the kindergarten. And we haven't passed that threshold yet. We still think that we are unique and special and privileged, and we might be the smartest kids in the universe. And I think it's very unlikely that Albert Einstein was the smartest scientist that ever lived since the Big Bang, because most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun, and next to one of them there might have been a planet like the Earth where a much smarter scientist than Albert Einstein existed 1 billion years ago. And if that was true, then over the past billion years, that civilization had a chance of sending equipment to our vicinity. And whether we live in such a reality or not is not a philosophical question. We just need to look around. You can sit at home and say, I don't have any neighbors because I don't hear anyone knocking on my door. But of course, you have to look through your windows and better use a telescope to find your neighbors. Most of the time, nobody is knocking on your door. And my point in the book is that we have seen something that you may regard as a knock on the door, even though we were not paying attention. That is the first object that we discovered near Earth that came from outside the solar system. It was discovered by a telescope in Hawaii, given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout or a messenger from afar. And it looked really weird. It didn't look like a comet or an asteroid, the type of rocks that we saw before in the solar system. And because of all of its anomalies, I said maybe it was produced by another civilization artificially, because it doesn't look like any rock we've seen before. Now, I explain in my book all the anomalies, and other scientists, other astronomers try to explain them as a type of a rock that we've never seen before, like made of pure hydrogen, made of pure nitrogen. We've never seen anything like it. And to me, it reminds of a cave dweller that finds a cell phone. And of course, that person is used to playing with rocks. And so the argument would be that, oh, this cell phone is a rock of a type that we've never seen before. But if the cave dweller bothers to press a button, then it would become clear that that device can record the voice, and obviously it's not a rock. And so my point is that, extraordinary realizations require us to be open-minded and require us to fund the search, to look through our windows and build telescopes, that will allow us to see things that are unusual. And I think the discovery of Oumuamua is intriguing enough for us to do it in the future. That's why I established a new project called the Galileo Project. We can talk about that. And actually, the government already recognizes this. President Biden signed into law a few weeks ago the establishment of a new office in government that would assemble data on objects that look weird near Earth. They are called unidentified aerial phenomena.
Wow, that's incredible, because I feel like until this point, there was such a reticence in the government, in the scientific community, your peers out there who didn't want to touch anything like this. They wanted to poo-poo it. They wanted to say it was a comet or an asteroid, even though it looked significantly different and moved differently. Can you talk about the difference specifically about how Oumuamua is different than a comet or an asteroid?
Right. So first of all, astronomers thought it's a comet because comets are rocks covered with ice, and when they get close to the sun, they get warmed up and the ice evaporates, and you end up with a tail, a cometary tail made of water vapor and dust. And there was nothing like that around this object. You couldn't see any cometary tail. So it was definitely not a comet of the type that we are familiar with. And then the astronomer said, oh, well, maybe it's just a rock, but as it was tumbling every 8 hours, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10. And that implied that it has a very extreme shape, sort of like a piece of paper tumbling in the wind. The amount of area that you see from the piece of paper changes by a lot as it tumbles. And the amount of area of this object changed by a factor of 10 projected on the sky for us because it just reflected sunlight. Then it implied that it's most likely flat and with a very extreme shape, like a pancake. And then this object was pushed away from the sun by a force other than that cannot be due to the rocket effect from evaporating gases. And the only explanation I could think of is the reflection of sunlight is pushing it. But for that to be effective, it needed to be very thin, like a sail. And actually in September 2020, there was another object discovered. It was given the name 2020 SO. It was found by the same telescope in Hawaii. And it ended up being a rocket booster that was launched in 1966 from Earth. And it also had no cometary tail, obviously, and it was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight. So here is another illustration for an artificial object. This one was not designed to be a sail. It was just thin. We know that it's artificial because NASA produced it. And the question is, who produced Oumuamua?
Well, what's to say that this isn't some, man-made thing from the 60s? I mean, we were starting to have stealth technology in the 60s. Is this something that our government produced and sent off and they don't want to claim ownership of it now? I mean, is that a possibility?
Well, that was actually the explanation of 2020 SO, this object discovered in September 2020. But in the case of Oumuamua, it cannot be the explanation because Oumuamua is not bound to the sun gravitationally. So it came with a very high speed. So it couldn't have been associated with a launch from Earth because then, if it were to come back, it would be bound to the sun. So if we send something from Earth at a speed that would not make it not bound to the sun, like for example the New Horizons mission that is leaving the solar system, then it will never come back. But if we want it to come back from some earlier time, then it needs to be bound to the sun, and we would notice that it's not moving very fast.
Oh, so going back to the scientific community, your peers who again want to, present a united front, what do you think it's going to take for them to say, yes, this is a strange phenomenon. Yes, we can't explain it. There is then a possibility of life beyond Earth, intelligence beyond Earth. What do you think it's going to take to tip the scales in your favor, in your direction, with what you've been saying this whole time?
Very simple. Having a megapixel image of such an object. So if you imagine taking a cell phone and snapping a photograph by standing on the object, that would be it. Now, it would tell you whether it's what some astronomers suggested, maybe a hydrogen iceberg, nitrogen iceberg, a cloud of dust particles, or it has bolts and screws on it, and you can press a button if you want. You can tell from a high-resolution image. So it's not a philosophical question. There was a philosopher that published a paper in a prestigious scientific journal arguing that based on philosophical reasoning, it must be natural. And that looked ridiculous to me because I thought that we learned the lesson from 4 centuries ago when philosophers put Galileo Galilei in house arrest just because he said that the Earth moves around the sun, and they said, no, the Earth is at the center of the universe. Everything is moving around the Earth. The sun is also moving around the Earth. And he said, why don't you look through my telescope and maybe you will realize that you're wrong? And they said, no, we don't want to look through your telescope. And they put him in house arrest. Now, the problem is, if you were to ask those philosophers to design a rocket that would get to Mars, they would get it wrong. They would never reach Mars because they would think that Mars moves around the Earth. Mm-hmm. And that's a test that what they argued is wrong. It doesn't matter how popular they were at the time, how politically influential they were. They could put him in house arrest so that other people will not listen to him. Today, they would have canceled him on social media. But that's completely irrelevant. The Earth continues to move around the sun. So whether we recognize that we have neighbors or not, if we say that we don't have neighbors, if we ridicule any search for evidence for that, if we argue that there is no extraordinary evidence, that will not get rid of our neighbors. So it's really simple. And to get the evidence, all you need is to send a camera close enough to an object like Oumuamua and get the image. That's all. And I established the Galileo Project in July 2021, of course, to commemorate the spirit of Galileo Galilei that argued that evidence should lead us rather than prejudice. But this project, one of the main objectives, one of the branches is to design a space mission that would bring a camera close enough to the next Oumuamua. You know, the Oumuamua was so unusual and unexpected that by the time we realize that it's special, it's already gone and we can't look at it. It's sort of like going on a date with someone that you really start to appreciate after the date, and then it's too late. That person is not around anymore. So then you are trying to date the next Oumuamua. And that's what the hope is. The hope is to find more objects that look like it, as weird as it was. With the Vera Rubin Observatory that will come online within a year in Chile, much more sensitive than the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii that discovered Oumuamua. And we should find more of the same. You know, when I go to the kitchen and I see an ant, I usually get alarmed because there must be many more ants out there.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, is this new frontier that we're having, we're heading towards with all of this new technology that's coming out within, a few years? Do you think there's going to be so much evidence out there that it's going to shock people? Or do you think there's been enough trickling of information with books like yours, with people who have recorded their own sightings and have their own stories? Do you think that the public is going to be almost blasé about this? Like, of course we have neighbors. The universe is massive and there's tons of it.
Yeah, I think the public resonates with that idea. The scientific community ridicules it and distances itself from the public, which is very strange in my mind because, academia is supposed to reflect the interest of the public because, after all, the public funds science and academia. And on a subject like that has huge implications for the future of humanity, for the way we think about ourselves and our place in the universe, I would argue that it should be mainstream of science, that a lot of money should be allocated for this, and not just for rather esoteric questions like what is the dark matter. That most of the matter of in the universe is not known. For 40 years we've been searching and investing billions of dollars in the search. We haven't found it yet, and that's part of the mainstream. And why would that be considered legitimate? Whereas the search for something like us, we know that we exist. We know that half of the sun-like stars have a planet like the Earth, roughly at the same separation. And why shouldn't we look for something that predated us? Evidence for that, from equipment that was sent into space. To me, it sounds like a very reasonable and commonsensical proposition. And I would think this should be obvious that the academic world should be engaged in this search, and when there are anomalous objects, we will find them. And there is this poem by Robert Frost, who lived not far from where I live, Taking the Road Not Taken. And for him it made all the difference when two roads in the woods offered themselves for him to take, and he took the road not taken. And the advantage that I see in doing that is that there may be low-hanging fruit in the road that was not taken because nobody took that road, so nobody picked up those fruits. And there is a chance that with the Galileo Project, within a year or two, we will find some low-hanging fruit. So I would argue stay tuned. And I don't really care how much pushback I get and whether I get likes on Twitter or not. Because I'm not subscribed to any social media whatsoever. I'm just trying to do what sounds right to me.
That begs the question, what was different about your upbringing, your parents, your circumstances that, made you who you are, your special sauce? Because I would say 99% of the academic community wants to stay safe and they want to protect their, their reputations and they want to stay in this little box. What makes you different? And I heard in an interview you say, you're one of those people who puts his body over the barbed wire so we can all progress. What makes you different? What happened?
Right. So I grew up on a farm. I was much more connected to nature than to people. Also, I was interested in philosophy, which asks the big questions. I had to serve in the military, and that brought me to physics. I ended up in an arranged marriage. After many decades, I realized that I'm married to my true love, because there are some fundamental questions about the universe that we can address as physicists, astrophysicists, and that's what I'm doing. And I think this is the most fundamental question. Is there a smarter kid on the block? Because it would change everything for us if we realize that there is. We could learn from that kid, the other thing that happened was a few years ago, both my parents passed away. And then I realized, we live for such a short time. Let's focus on substance and not on trying to impress each other. Sort of what what was said to Vivian Lee by Clark Gable. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. In the sense that I don't care how many likes I get on Twitter. And what really motivates me is a question that is of importance to society, that is really exciting, and science doesn't need to be boring. And I think when we have that image that I was talking about, this photograph of high resolution of an object that clearly is not human-made, and it's not natural, not a rock, but it's something else. At that point, it's not. I won't even feel the need to convince anyone. Mm-hmm. I will just know the answer, and that will be enough for me. Just like Galileo sort of knew the answer, and eventually other people caught up with it. I don't really care about other people. I just want to know the reality that we live in. You see, that just figuring out what reality, what is our neighborhood like? Do we have neighbors? And who are they? I want to know that, and I don't care if other people ridicule this question. I don't need to convince them if I have the evidence, if I have that photograph.
Yeah, and I honestly believe that you have so many people behind you who are hungry for this type of information, for a greater knowing, and you really are like the Galileo of the new time. Because, do you feel connected to him, like more on a philosophical, like on a deeper level, that he kind of lives, through you, through the work that you're doing now?
Well, yeah, I would have definitely invited him to be a honorary member of the Galileo Project that we have. But I'm sure he was a very different person than I am. I'm on a low-carb diet. I'm sure he was not at the time. I jog every morning at 5 a.m. and I listen to music that he probably would not appreciate. I like the latest music. In a way, I learned the lesson that he taught us, that I'm a student of his more than anything. And, and I think it's not about us. You see, that's the point, that when people do science, when people do any profession, they often think about themselves and their ego and how do they impress other people, and I realized that instead of focusing on accomplishments of the past, we should focus on the time that we have left and make the most of it. And it's not about us. It's about trying to figure out things, like where we are, the reality that we live in. And it's the actual reality. It's not the virtual reality. You can put goggles of the metaverse on your head, and you will be at the center of the universe, and you will be the smartest in the universe. But that is not necessarily the reality that we all share. And I was talking with William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk in the USS Enterprise on Star
Yeah.
Trek just a week ago. And I told him, you among everyone would understand my point the best, because for many years you played Captain Kirk in some fictitious story, in a virtual reality. And then half a year ago, you flew to space
Yeah.
on the craft of Jeff Bezos, and so it probably felt very different, the actual reality versus the virtual reality. And he said, I completely agree with you. So the point is, I'm really in love with reality. I want to see all its pimples, and a lot of people cover up reality. They put some makeup so that you won't see things that they don't like. And I pretty much, when you are in love with something, you want to know everything about that something. And that's the way I approach the actual reality that we live in. I don't want virtual reality. I don't want to have hallucinations, to take recreational drugs where I would imagine some fictitious reality. I don't want to believe in extra dimensions, the multiverse, if I cannot test those ideas, like many physicists are. They contemplate ideas that allow them. It's like a sandbox for them to demonstrate their mathematical skills and to show that they are smart. That's not the issue. Not showing that you are smart is not really the issue. Trying to figure out the reality that we live in is, in my mind, the most exciting thing we can do.
Yeah, and I feel like it's such a practical way to look at life, to look at the world, to figure out as much as you can and learn as much as you can while we're here, as you said, in this short amount of time. I mean, it's a blip. Is this what your legacy will be now through the Galileo Project, through this book? What do you want your legacy to be in the world?
Yeah, this is actually, and when I go to Harvard University, I often see paintings and sculptures of people that want to preserve something of their physical appearance, to leave a monument. This looks a little bit ridiculous to me, because within 1 billion years, the sun will burn up the surface of the earth, and there will be nothing left. So if you really want to leave a monument of yourself, you better send a spacecraft, that carries something about you, and will survive for billions of years, more than the sun. And to me, if there is a way to leave something behind, it would be in the form of a piece of equipment in space, and with the kind of thing I'm trying to find. So that's why I think they may have done it as well. And it could be equipped with artificial intelligence, and so it doesn't need to be biological at all. And I'm actually very embarrassed by the New Horizons mission that went to Pluto, to explore Pluto, because they put a box, NASA put a box with the ashes of Clyde Tombaugh in it, 30 grams of the ashes. And if you think about it, ashes are just burned up DNA. You take the genetic information about Clyde Tombaugh and you destroy it, and you destroy that information to commemorate him. And if an extraterrestrial would find this box, it will be very embarrassing. They would say, oh, these humans have this very primitive ritual of destroying the information about a person they want to commemorate. And by the way, this was sent by a scientific organization called NASA. So I actually approached the principal investigator and I said, look, you should have sent an electronic version or maybe a stem cell of Clyde Tombaugh so that the extraterrestrials would be able to reconstruct him. And he said, well, it would have been a bureaucratic nightmare for NASA to send a stem cell. So my goal is to send a spacecraft that would move faster than New Horizons, will overtake it and apologize for what comes behind. So if anyone finds it, it will not be so embarrassing.
Would you ever use your own DNA to send out?
No, I think we as biological creatures are very flawed. We have a lot of weaknesses. And I would be very proud of an AI system that represents me, the artificial intelligence that is perhaps smarter than I am, but carries the blueprint, the guiding principles that I believe in. So to me, having a technological kid would be fantastic, because that kid can live forever, billions of years. We have biological kids, but they are just like us. They live for a short time, and are sort of a copy of our DNA. And what nature produced over 4.5 billion years here on Earth by chance is not necessarily the best thing you can imagine. It's just a soup of chemicals came together, made all kinds of microbes, eventually ended up making complex creatures like humans. But you can imagine something better than us. And one step beyond us may be AI systems. And I would be very happy sending an AI system that represents me as my technological kid into space, and that would be my monument.
But do you believe in the existence of a soul?
No, I think it's just what physicists call an emergent phenomenon. In other words, the human brain is so complex, is capable of doing very complex things. And so then you see humans exhibiting behavior that, is very complex. And so they give it the name a soul. And by the way, 1,000 years ago, people thought, the human soul exists, and therefore you shouldn't anatomy should be forbidden. You shouldn't dissect the human body because you might hurt the soul by dissecting it. And now we know that from modern medicine that no harm is done if you operate a human. No harm is done to the soul. And thanks to those operations, we have a better understanding of the human body. But we haven't found anything, when operating a human body, we haven't found anything inside that looks like a soul. Okay, so my tendency is that we're made of atoms, and they're just organized in ways that make us very complex and capable of great things. But that's it. So when we die, it's just like unplugging a computer from the wall. So the system shuts off, and that's it.
Interesting. Has the discovery of Oumuamua and the creation of this book and just the work that you do each and every day, has that affected how you parent your children, how you look at parenting in general?
No, because my daughters are now, they grew up, but perhaps if I were to have a small baby, I would behave differently in educating that baby early on. Yes, I would agree with that. Because this perspective changes the way I look about things. But my daughters, they don't need to listen to me anymore. They have their lives.
I would
So when you
disagree.
say parenting,
I still talk to my parents all the time and seek their advice. So I don't know. I disagree with that.
okay. Well, maybe they do listen. Maybe I underestimate my influence.
Oh, for sure. We are getting to the end of the time. If there were one final message that you would want to leave with the audience, the listener who's, their mind is expanding right now just by hearing this conversation, what would that message be?
Well, that science can be an extension of your childhood curiosity. That, one of the most vivid memories that I have from childhood is asking a difficult question at the dinner table, and the adults in the room would dismiss the question because they didn't know the answer to it. And the way I see science is as a way of asking the question and trying to answer it yourself. Don't rely on the adults in the room. That's my message. Don't pay attention. They just pretend.
Love that. I love that so much. Oh, okay. So where can the audience find more about you, even though you're not online, find more about your book and the Galileo Project?
Right. So I am online, not on social media. If I have a professional website where people can find my weekly essays, commentaries. I just did one yesterday and another one the day before. And I publish mostly in Medium, in The Hill, and in the Debrief. But you can find a collection of all my essays there, and they're up-to-date, very recent ones as well. And there are also some interviews that I post there, videos from recent interviews. And of course, there is more about what we talked today in my book, Extraterrestrial, that is coming in paperback actually this week. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And all of those websites will be in the show notes, of course, if you are out walking about and you don't have a pen right now. Dr. Loeb, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your book, and thank you for your message of curiosity and just really discovery that the world right now needs so much.
Thank you for hosting me. It was a real pleasure.